Hey guys, this is Focus Face's training video on interior caulking, especially on windows. This is basically after we've got our window cased in with trim and nail holes filled and sanded. So you can come take a look at where we're at right now. So we've got our interior wrapped trim inside the sill, as well as our face trim on, leaving a 1/4 inch reveal on every side. That makes it a lot easier for caulking. If you go any thinner than that, yeah, it just makes caulking more difficult. This gives you a little bit more forgiveness and ability to, yeah, get a nice looking bead at the end. So what we've done so far, we did this morning. We filled all our nail holes in with a wood filler, and then we have sanded all those down currently. And then for painting's sake, we've also taped off our window. What we did on the window taping is we left a 1/4 inch reveal around all the edges you can see, and then we've got painter's plastic over the window itself so that when we spray, obviously we're not getting any on the windowsill or the glass itself. So first things first, make sure you have a clean, dust-free zone. So I like to get in here, especially with flat surface is the main issue. Get in here, give it a good sweep. I've also vacuumed this beforehand to make sure any little fine bits are out, and then really give it a nice blow. And I also like to just hit all of our little edges, corners, as well as the corners on the windows themselves, just to make sure all that dust is gone. Because any dust is going to keep your caulk from sticking as well. So now that we've got our surface prepped, the first step I like to start with is getting our corners here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So basically, we've gone over this in exterior caulking. It's the same principle. When you're making your cut on your caulking tube, flat cut, these ones for interior trim, we like to keep a little closer, under a 1/4 inch if possible, so almost closer to the 1/8 inch mark on when you're cutting that. It just keeps a nice small bead. You don't want tons of caulk on these joints. So just keeping it a little less messy, a little less wipe up at the end. But again, if you have a really wide joint, you can look in here and see we're tight on our corners there. We have a little more of a gap in the center. So depending on the size of your gap, if you have a really big gap you need to fill, obviously cut your tube accordingly. But for the most part, if you did this right, you should end up with very, very small gaps. A 1/16 inch at most is what we're looking for. So when you're caulking, again, we want to think about 2 things, actually 3 things really. You want to think about your pressure on your trigger, you want to think about the angle of your gun, and then you also want to think about your speed. So I'll start here on the outside edges because these are actually really easy and simple. Really on our anything eye level, we only hit the outside 2 edges. So you can look in here where our trim meets our drywall. Sometimes there is a bigger gap there, but that's what I'll start with just to give you guys an example. So we want to be at a 45 degree into our crack. So you don't want to be like pushing towards the drywall. You also don't want to be pushing too far towards your trim. You want to be a nice 45 degrees into the joint. And then you also want to be about a 30-degree angle pointed down. I always like to travel downward with my caulking. If you try to go up, it just makes things less consistent. You end up with humps and ridges, and yeah, just going downward, you're using gravity as your friend to just let everything fall into place. So those are our 2 things. We got our 45 degree, we got our 30 degree, and then the last bit is thinking about your pressure. This just takes practice really to get good at where you want your trigger to be. It depends on the temperature. So if it's a cold morning, if your caulk is cold, you're gonna need a little more pressure to get it to come out nicely. Ideally, you keep your caulking in your truck or in somewhere heated. That way you're not dealing with really tough viscous caulking. So with that being said, I'm just gonna do this joint. You guys can watch the process here. So I'm gonna start from the top, 45 degree, a little bit of an angle down, and we're gonna start the squeeze. You can see it's starting to come out, and then we're gonna start moving. I'm gonna reset, get my trigger because I'm about out there. We're gonna squeeze again. Usually you can do it in 2 passes. So there's the first step. Next thing I like to always have next to me is a damp, not wet sponge, just damp. If it's too wet, like you shouldn't be able to squeeze too much water out of it. There should be a little bit, but you don't want this thing soaked because we're gonna use this as cleanup. So basically always get a wet finger That's kind of the trick. Some people lick their fingers, but yeah, sponge works way better. And then you're just gonna take your finger. We're not trying to push hard and press that caulk. We're basically just smoothing it out. So what we've done is we've created a 45 bevel basically with that caulking now. And what we're doing with our finger, we're gonna get it wet and we're just gonna run it down that bead. See how that smooths it out nice and even? And you don't want a lot of caulk. See how I have barely any on my finger? You really shouldn't have more than a pea-sized amount when you're done with each pass. And then we're gonna run back up. Boom, and there's a little spot there. I'm gonna run one more time down, smooth that out. And that's what your joint should look like at the end, nice and smooth. You can do a few more little passes with your finger if you need to, but we're looking for a nice, smooth, consistent sized bead. You don't want a big glob in the middle, thin edges, the top and bottom. Try to keep it consistent. Hit our 4 corners like I mentioned. So we have these seams where our 2 pieces of trim meet up on our face trim. And sometimes the seams aren't bad. In this case, they're pretty close to a 16th or less, which is ideal. But what we're gonna do, same process, we're just gonna run nice, simple little bead over each. This one doesn't have to be perfect because we're gonna clean that up in a second. Basically just filling those cracks with caulk, and then you're gonna come by, wipe each one of these, get most of the caulking off the top because we're trying to make that a finished look at the end. And then this time, for these only, we're gonna actually take the sponge and give it a nice gentle wipe. And that is basically the same process as what you'd be doing if you were sanding that joint. It's basically just smoothing that caulk out. And since this is a water base, it kind of just dissolves the caulk on the edges and really makes it look nice. You can give it a couple other little feather passes if you need to. But this is again why we don't want this sponge super wet, because we don't want to get our MDF super soaking wet. So it's just a really light, simple pass on those. Now as we're going to get into our interior here, there isn't really necessarily a right or wrong way to do it, but the way I like to do it is start again on your 4 corners. So we're going to start on each of these. I'll do the bottoms first. We're going to start and work our way. Again, you can work in, you can work out. I like to work from the inside corner. Try not to do a ton of caulk on these. You want to look something like that, about a 1/4 inch of the bead. This one I'll work in so you can see the difference. Really no change in the appearance, but it's just up to preference or the angle you have to work with. If it's a really tight space or it's awkward, you can change what you're doing. Boom, so we have those. We're not gonna wipe anything till the end on this one. So we're gonna get all of our seams done and get our wiping at the end. So there's our first. I like to also just keep the sponge nearby, wipe the tip of your caulking off, keep that clean as you go. So again, working from top to bottom, we're gonna hit these here. Boom, 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 boom. Ooh. So you can see here, see how that fell off? That means we had a little bit of dust back there, and that's why it didn't stick. So we're gonna run over that again. That will happen occasionally, and that's okay. We're just gonna keep going all the way bottom. One. The other side. Working top to bottom, even pressure, keeping that angle, keeping your 45. And we're gonna run the bottom, left to right, right to left, doesn't matter. If you're right-handed or left-handed, maybe one's easier. For me, I like to go right to left. That's another thing, be careful not to get stuck on anything as you're moving. That'll create bumps. Okay, now our inside there is done. Now we're gonna hit these corners here. Basically where our face trim meets our wrapping trim on the inside. Same process, working down. Same process, working down. And then again, don't be afraid to squeeze the trigger pretty hard as you're moving. If you're really wanting to get the caulk to go into that crack, not just sit on the surface on some of these, especially if it's a bigger crack on any parts. Okay, there we go. We have our caulk on the seam, so now we're gonna grab our sponge and get your fingers wet. Like I said, we'll just start the same way we did the caulking. So we'll start on our 4 corners, starting from the center, or starting from the corner, working out. Usually works best for these with your finger, nice and even pressure. These ones are gonna have a little more caulking come off because the corners build up. When you're hitting all 3 of these, you get a nice glob in there, so you're basically taking that glob out of the corner. Same here, get some pressure, bam. And this is the point where you can start to see if there's any spots you didn't get enough caulking. If you see any cracks or you can see into the crack, obviously you need to redo that whole thing and throw more in there. So there's those. We're gonna go ahead and hit our interiors here. Always like to go from corner to center. So I'll do one pass down, one pass up. That prevents you from ending in a corner, because if you end at the corner and you pull your finger out, you end up pulling the caulk, and it makes a nice little, you can see right here, it makes one of those, just kind of a nasty looking corner. So starting in the corners, working in, starting in the corner, working in, gives you a nice look at the finish. Again, corner up, there we go. Last one is inside, from the outside in. Boom, boom, boom. Always wet your finger and wipe it between each pass on your sponge. All right, so we've got all those. Now we're gonna go to our outside face here again, starting in the corner, working down. See how nice that looks, just beautiful. And if you have a little transition here where it doesn't look great, just come through, wipe it again. And then again, if you need to correct anything, it's really easy to do while it's still wet. You don't wanna wait too long. If you wait more than like 5 minutes, this is going to start to set up, and it's going to be pretty much impossible to spread it with your finger at that point. So do all your corrections right as you're going. Don't do a bunch of windows at once and then come back. You want to do one window at a time. Take your time on it. Again, this is a skill that takes a lot of repetition to get it down. So don't feel bad if your first window doesn't go well. It's a process. So be patient, and we'll see you on the next video.